unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely collected, even after 1,000 million kalpas. Having is to see and listen to remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth about the Tathagata's words.
I had one of those surreal moments Norman was talking about right before the chant. It was just this moment of like, what's this? You know what I mean? What? And then of course the mind comes crashing down with all the, usual stuff. Oh, it's a Dharma talk at a sesshin. You're supposed to do it. They're supposed to listen and love you. But no, you're not supposed to think that. But these moments, right? These moments of words aren't right. You can only use funny shorthand like surreal or emptiness or whatever. We don't know what to say. And I want to really appreciate the people online. I know we're not really pulling off a high-class online operation, but I hope you've been able to see and hear okay and participate. And David, Sheely, I don't know if we've met. Yeah, thanks for the thumbs up, Kim. I was indeed seeking reassurance. That was kind of you. And David especially, you're always there. At least your name is on your little square, so. Good here, says David, who's always there. Thank you for being always there. What a committed thing to do. And Carol and David and Kondo Ray and Kim and John and Travis are online. So thanks, guys. Maybe others. There's a little arrow. And we're here. So we think. So I appreciated Norman's reminder yesterday that you can't understand America without deeply investigating the African slave trade and the economy that spawned it, and how that reverberates to this day and will continue reverberating for the rest of time. That's really deeply true, isn't it? Tragically so. But I think after you say that, you have to also remember that you can't understand America without also deeply investigating what happened to the people that lived here when the idea that became America started to arrive from Europe. And interestingly, there's a funny parallel. Juneteenth was commemorating a day in 1865. An important thing happened in the year 1862 in the Northwest. In that year, a passenger steamship arrived in the booming new town of Victoria, British Columbia, bringing with it passengers, but also with the passengers, bringing with it a deadly cargo in addition to the passengers who were deadly cargo, but even more so, bringing with it smallpox, the smallpox virus, the first known cases in the Pacific Northwest. And I don't know about you, but the story I think I received in school, probably from 6th grade social studies class, was that the enormous and deadly impact of smallpox, there's other diseases too, but smallpox was the biggie, that deadly impact on native populations by these European diseases was pretty much bad luck for them. The Europeans' bodies were accustomed to these diseases, had some inherent resistance or immunity. But the people in the so-called New World, which was not a new world to the people who lived here, but simply the world, that those people's bodies were not resistant. And so it went horribly and lethally wrong for them. Deeply regrettable, but no one's fault. Exactly. And I also vaguely remembered from school, and this was, I think, probably from health class in maybe 7th grade. It's funny how the school system chunks up knowledge, right? Separate little chunks as if they were separate. But I remember learning also something about vaccines. Probably it was kind of a prelude or a backstory to teaching us kids that vaccines were important for staying healthy. Important inventions by science. Go science. But something vaguely in my mind about the smallpox vaccine being like one of the first vaccines, and something to do with cows having a similar disease, and some clever, courageous scientist, who was definitely a white man, FYI, guessing right about inoculation and testing these first vaccines based on cow blood serum on himself and Eureka, coming up with a vaccine, the first vaccine. And I did actually pop onto Wikipedia for a minute yesterday to see how far off that memory was, and kind of a mashup of real events, more or less. Many other people, and the self-testing was actually like a farmer testing on his family, interestingly. Anyway. But as a young man, what didn't occur to me was that there's a pretty big conflict between these two stories. On the one hand, smallpox was bad luck for the native population. On the other hand, the first vaccine invented was for that very same disease. So what gives here? Didn't think of that then. And I'm sure my teachers, as well-meaning as they were simply delivering the curriculum and didn't think about it either. I took a minute actually to thought about, well, how would I have found out the actual truth in the early 1970s in suburban Mountain View, California? Maybe there was accurate info on our World Book Encyclopedia somewhere. Kind of dusty blue cover, kind of cracked. Some letters were more used than others. Or maybe I could have found something out at the public library. Or maybe not. Probably I would have had to venture across to Stanford University to one of their libraries and dug into some kind of scholarly work to find out what really happened. That was beyond my reach, of course. I could probably have read the stuff, but I was way too shy to walk into a university library when I thought of that. But these days, a few minutes on the internet will set you straight. So that's quite a change, actually, if you think about it. And I won't go into it now. And maybe you already know about this, probably you do, that it's a very sad and horrible tale. Maybe disgusting is an accurate word. But I think we should all learn about this stuff. The African American experience, the Native experience, and learn about some of these gruesome, horrible details. Because that's our responsibility. As people, as bodhisattva practitioners, and probably most of us here qualify as members of the dominant privileged classes which benefited from these world events that happened on our continent. We didn't mean to, we were born into it, but we did. So this is tough stuff. You can't read this kind of stuff, learn this kind of stuff without being really nauseous and upset and crying a lot if you're paying attention. And ashamed is reasonable too. But of course, that's a small, tiny shade of how it would be had I been a member of these oppressed groups, for sure. So anyway, I just wanted to name that. It felt important to complete that pair. And there's plenty of hope and change and growth in all this, but it does sometimes feel like a small drop in a very big bucket. Our changing awareness, recognition. I read a couple of days ago that the city of Chicago, as well as several other municipalities, have started commissions to try to figure out how to offer reparations to their African American, their black citizens. So something there. I also read recently about an active program supporting the tribes in buying back at least teeny little slivers of their ancestral lands. There's a significant initiative around that in the Owens Valley, Eastern Sierra, California, which is where not only were the lands taken, but all the water. So maybe the tribes will get some of that back. And LA will have to watch its water use a little more carefully. Anyway. And maybe one last point, and then we'll go back to Dōgen, which is also always making the same point. You have to be in awe of the human mind's ability to dehumanize, don't you? It's really literally awesome, not in a good way, but invoking awe that the mind can do that. I learned one time that it may be that neurologically we actually conceptualize people whom we don't see as people with a different part of our brain than the part of our brain that tends to be active when we're interacting with people we see as people. We treat the others literally as objects down to the neurological level, not as people. Whether these others are black people or Indians or Tutsis or Palestinians or Armenians or Jews, the list is, of course, long, horribly long. And the connected research I learned about also pointed out, and so here's a ray of hope in this depressing Dharma talk beginning, it actually seems to be not that hard to get the brain to switch them back. Switch them back to humanizing members of your human tribe. And one of the odd things I remember, there was a number of experimental techniques the scientists tried in this one study. Email me later, I can send it to you. But one of the ones was, think about this person you other, and try to imagine what kind of vegetables they like. No kidding. No kidding. And then they put you in the brain scanner, and then the better part of your brain lights up. Since you think about carrots, and that they probably don't like broccoli, but they probably do like lettuce, then, oh yeah, they're people too. I didn't realize that. How did the scientists think of that? Vegetables for world peace. The organic veggie gardeners in the group are rejoicing. Yeah. So back to our dear Dōgen. The fourth chapter of Gakudo-Yojinshu, Points for Practicing the Way, includes another one of Suzuki Roshi's central themes. You know, you read Dōgen and you understand Suzuki Roshi a little more. You know, you read Suzuki Roshi, you understand Dōgen a little more. Different words for the same stuff. Because the title of this chapter is Do Not Practice Buddha Dharma with a Gaining Mind. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? Do not practice Buddha Dharma with a gaining mind. So I took this chapter and edited out some of the repetition and confusing bits to make it easier for me and you, I hope. So here's my distilled version of the fourth chapter of this text called Do Not Practice Buddha Dharma with Gaining Mind. This is Dōgen. I didn't change his words, I just dropped a few. It's important to receive instruction from a teacher when practicing the Buddha Dharma. Never use your own ideas as a basis. If your aspiration to practice is not in accord with the way, your body and mind will never rest in peace. And if the body and mind are not at peace, thorns grow on the path of realization. How should you practice? Refrain from clinging to anything or rejecting anything. And free yourself from desire for fame and profit. Do not practice the Buddha Dharma in order to gain a good reputation. For some people, if no one respects or flatters them, they neglect practice, even though they know it's in accord with the true way. How shameful! A practitioner of the Buddha Dharma should not practice for his own sake, should not practice for his own sake. How can you possibly think of practicing for fame and profit? Just practice for the sake of Buddha Dharma. The Buddhas take pity on all living beings and help them through compassion. Everything they do is neither for themselves or for others. This is the way of Buddha Dharma. For fathers and mothers, after their young have grown up, they receive no reward. And yet they have compassion towards their young. So it is with Buddha's compassion towards all living beings. We are already the children of Buddha. How can we refrain from following the Buddha's path? Compassion is the function of Buddha's genuine Dharma. A practitioner should not practice Buddha Dharma for his own sake in order to gain fame and profit, or to attain good results, or to pursue miraculous powers. Practice the Buddha Dharma only for the sake of the Buddha Dharma. This is the way. So that's a lot. Not as bad as reading the whole Shin Shin Ming through, though, I didn't think. Figured I had cover, you know. I can do a long excerpt now. So it's kind of in 3 sections, so let's look back at a few of these bits here. So the point in this chapter about not trying to do something to get something is definitely here. But there are some interesting deeper waters and some very practical points in this passage. The first one is, he says, the Buddha Dharma cannot be attained with mind or with no mind. So this is an interesting way of talking about don't try to gain something. He goes to the essence right away. The Buddha and Dharma cannot be attained with mind or with no mind. There is nothing that you could attain anyway, so how silly to think you could get anything here. And not that you should practice and just try to soften up about the idea of getting something. There's nothing to get. And don't think that maybe you can do some kind of spiritual end run around this by thinking, well, maybe no mind can get something that's not anything. No, not even that. So there's nothing to attain. And this has big implications for us, doesn't it? And big challenges, because it undercuts a lot of the way we tend to think and function. So now he tries to bring it back to the practical for us. And Dōgen does do this. He shakes us up with a conceptual or non-conceptual statement, And then he'll usually eventually give us some kind of pointer, sometimes. How should you practice? Well, refrain from clinging to anything or rejecting anything. That's how. So this is super practical, right? We can notice this. We can notice clinging and rejecting. It's not too hard to do. Simple. We can watch how the conditioned mind is endlessly, exhaustingly, sometimes entertainingly, stuck on this, right? And we can notice these two sides to the same mental move, clinging and rejecting. Clinging, desiring, wanting, it should be this way, it should be that way, I should feel this, I should feel that. Rejecting, no, I shouldn't feel this, I shouldn't feel that, this shouldn't happen. When are they going to ring the damn bell? Right? Lots of clinging and rejecting happening all the time in our relative minds. And so what he says to do about that is refrain from it. So I think the thing here is that refrain from refrain from doesn't mean that somehow we're going to get this right one day and these conditioned thoughts will never arise. That would contradict the earlier part, right? That there's nothing to attain. And that idea, which is such a common and very defeating misunderstanding of the teachings, shows up all the time, right? In all of us. It's not working, I'm not doing it right. These crazy thoughts are still coming. It's embarrassing and upsetting to watch my mind. But no, he's saying that these impulses may arise, these leanings, this energy, this life energy, Life wants to engage, Push away. This energy will arise. And we can just leave it at that. We can notice the chains of thoughts and energies and emotions and theories and philosophies and personalities and everything that you can possibly imagine can hook to one of these little impulses and just drive your life all week, all year, all of your life, right? This is the practice point. Notice and don't get hooked, which means, in the practical sense, get hooked and suffer till it lets go. And maybe next time, you won't get quite so hooked. Maybe. Takes a lot of patience, doesn't it, if you notice that. One practical thing, do you know the practice of noting, sometimes called labeling? This is a nice practice, super useful here at Sesshin. You could try this, if it seems helpful. Just quietly saying to yourself, in just like a word or two at the most, not a long exposition, what it is the mind just got hooked by, the mind just got attracted to, the mind just started building on. What is the mental state, moment, feeling, experience that started it all, you know? Walk yourself back. I'm walking back to the source here. And just apply, like a simple label, you know? And the spirit here is not like, cool, I got this figured out. The spirit is kind of more like, duly noted, you know? I see this, okay. Ready for the next moment, you know? And you just have to see what seems like the best way to do this. You develop a little vocabulary for your crazy mind, you know, based on its predilections. Maybe it's a lot of time worrying, planning, doubting. Doesn't matter what you're doubting, that's the thing. You don't have to get lost in the details. That just feeds the beast, you know. For me, the most notable use of this in my life that I usually think about is practicing with judgment. And I think this has helped. Not that there is no judgment, believe me. But I think it's less. I think so. To just note as often and as clearly and as simply as I could whenever a judgment arose, just judgment and not so much getting lost in, she shouldn't have said that, that shouldn't have happened, what's wrong with these people, what's wrong with me, you know. It goes on, it's like a rocket ship, right, you know. Superpower, the relative conditioned mind, it's strong, whisks you away. You're on another planet before you know it, and I was often on planet judgment, looking down at these idiots that I had to coexist with. Well, all the same, but also being a polite, shy person, maintaining a very kind, calm demeanor at all times. Oh, that's interesting. When are you going to shut up? Whatever. But little by little, I think it did get to be less, although initially it was quite shocking, because I didn't quite realize how much and how prevalent and how strong and how frequent and how incessant that mental habit seemed to be. Judgment. And the triggers, sesshin is great to look at the triviality of some of the triggers. Look at that mudra, oh my gosh. Or even smaller than that, you know. Kind of dragging your foot a little there. Judgment. And how much the content of the judgment doesn't matter at all. Sesshin's great for that. This is a great place to blow up unimportant stuff, isn't it? And while your mind believes it's important, when you do get hooked, you get hooked. So none of this is to say that here's the magic formula. You're welcome. You're all set now. But maybe it just stacks the odds a little more in the favor of awakening, you know? A little more in the favor of openness, acceptance, clarity. And a little less in favor of righteousness, blame, shame, and all the horrible things our mind is so capable of doing. And the other thing here about judgment and a lot of other of these difficult, afflictive mind states is that it is a small step indeed from judging your zazen form to dehumanizing you. It's not a very far road. And then we know where that leads. It's in the news every day. So this is important, I think, to recognize and remind ourselves regularly that we're not just here to improve ourselves. Feel a little better, be a little kinder, although that's great, please do. But this is actually peace work. This is bodhisattva work. We do this to heal the planet. As Chris was saying the other day, drinking a cup of tea, I stopped the war. I think that might be from a Lou Welch poem, actually, Chris, not an old Zengo, but you can look it up sometime. The internet awaits. So that's kind of the first part here of how to practice without gaining idea. Simple point, right? Refrain from clinging and rejecting. Oops, sorry. That's my mom, it's her birthday. Hi, Mom. I remembered to text her. I did break silence a little bit there, sorry. Because I had to text my mom, There were some years I was pure about my practice and didn't contact my mom on her birthday, which is always during Samish sesshin. That did not go well. So I've learned a little bit about compromise. She had a stroke 2 months ago, and she sent all the relatives a really upbeat note about her recovery. It's actually going pretty well. She's now walking without the walker. When I first got down there, she couldn't do anything by herself. And so we had a deep, full circle moment. First day I was there, she had changed my diaper many times, so it was my turn. That was something. She bore it well, too. I was really impressed by her, actually. Anyway, the text she just sent me as it flashed by seemed to be saying, yeah, I feel better, but I'm bored. Can't do anything. Sucked. Come on. Her feisty spirit is back. It's good. Anyway. So then Dōgen has a big, long section about fame and another kind of gaining, right? Gaining fame and fortune, This seems a little odd. Like, he went on a long time about that, even with my kind of editing him down a little bit. But I wanted you to get a sense that that was something he emphasized a lot. And this doesn't really seem on the face that relevant. Like, I don't think you think, or I think, that we're all here practicing to get famous, None of us expects to have our book lining the bookshelf at the bookstore, if there is still a bookstore in your town, or having a high rating on Amazon, I guess I should say. None of us expects to be even the third or the fourth teacher in one of Roshi Jones' fabulous Dharma seminars in Upaya, much less even a short essay in Tricycle magazine. So we don't really expect fame, I don't think. But he emphasizes this nonetheless. So let's hear it again, and maybe there's another way we can hear it that actually is more relevant. He wrote, "Free yourself from desire for fame and profit. Do not practice the Buddha Dharma in order to gain a good reputation. In fact, for some people, if no one respects or flatters them, they neglect practice even though they know it's in accord with the true way." How shameful. A practitioner of Buddha Dharma should not practice for his own sake anyway, or her own sake. How can you possibly think of practicing for fame or profit? Even worse. Just practice for the sake of Buddha Dharma. And by the way, this was clearly, we know even more this was a big deal to Dōgen because our translator here, Shohaku Okamura, also translated another Dōgen book called Shobo Genzo Zuimunki. And that was interesting because Dōgen didn't write it. It was his super student, Eijo, jotting down his own notes, writing down what Dōgen said, and Eijo wrote it all down. So we actually have this is cool actually, if you didn't know about this book. We have a first-hand account of what Dōgen actually said way back in the late 1230s, early 1240s, in his first monastery. So our translators translated that too. So he's making all these footnotes in this part about fame and profits. Yeah, it also says this and this and this and this and this in Shobo Genzo Zuimonki. So we know that he really talked about this a lot. So I think we shouldn't be too quick to write it off. Maybe if we hear fame and profit as something else. Maybe if we hear it as validation or appreciation. Just like a little bit of admiration, just a little bit. Don't need too much. The ways that maybe we do this for the eyes of others. And of course, back to watching your mind, you could also notice the mindset of comparison, right? Might this be the root of thinking that everybody else in the room is a better meditator than you? If you think that and think you're the only one thinking that, I have to tell you, you're wrong. And And if everybody's thinking that, who is the good meditator? It's the mythical person that we're all projecting on everybody else, you know? And if you think, well, actually, I am a good meditator, then that's the opposite of the same problem, you know? The other expression of the same problem. So I think we can really notice this. We can notice comparing mind. We can notice our deep conditioned, powerful need to be validated, appreciated, receive a few strokes, even as we have competing conditioning telling us not to be arrogant and vain. So it puts us in a knot, you know. So it's good Dōgen points us out, that we can remind ourselves gently, 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 and feel the suffering of when this spins up, just like I was describing with judgment. And remind ourselves, I just have to, all I need to do is sit down, you know. It doesn't matter what I look like or what, you know. I'm just going to practice for practice. I'm just going to practice. Forget about the what for. I'm just going to practice. What a relief that might be for even a moment. This is one of the big deal points one of my dear teachers, Blanche Hartman, used to bring up. Many of you know Blanche, I think. She received a strong correction from, I think it was actually Baker Roshi, not Suzuki Roshi. He did the cutting Zen master wisdom thing with her, which I guess you could do. She was spinning around, talking in some Dokusan meeting about, you know, how hard she was trying to do her practice. And, you know, she felt a little out of step because she was like 15, 20 years older than most of the students at the early San Francisco Zen Center. If I remember right, she said, Baker Roshi looked at her and said, "Do nothing for the sake of others." Ding, 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 ding. She walked out, shocked, looking around in the hallway and saying, "Oh my God, all I want is for them to look at me and think I'm good. That's all I want. Oh, no, I can't let that go." But it helped her, you know, it helped her. So sometimes the strong Zen master thing does help. Probably more likely to hurt than help. But lucky or unlucky for you, none of us around here know how to do that particularly. So. Anyway, so there's something to, I think, this fame and gain, not just a best-selling book contract or a spot on Oprah. Fabulous Zen revival led by Nomon Tim Burnett is making all the headlines. Last part, and I have a little bit to say about this part, so. I received a little criticism for going on too long the other day. Doesn't make me feel famous. I am famous for going on too long. It was given gently with good humor. Actually, it was the sandwich thing. The person said, "You know, your second talk was just the right length." So here's the last part of this chapter. And now we're talking about compassion, so I want to be sure and bring this up. I probably went on too long about the middle part. But because Chris was the main point of her talk too. That Dogen's just not just about twist your mind in a knot and release from all conceptual understanding and, you know, break through to the other side, you know, break on through. He's about compassion. And in fact, these are the same thing. So here's what he says about compassion. The Buddhas take pity on all living beings and help them through compassion. That makes sense. That sounds like boilerplate, right? Okay, we're with you here. Then he says, everything they do is neither for themselves, okay, nor for others. Oh? This is the way of Buddhism, not to practice for yourself or for others. And then he uses the metaphor of parents and children. For fathers and mothers, even after their young have grown, they receive no reward, and yet they have compassion towards their young, always. So it is with the Buddha's compassion towards all living beings, and we are the children of Buddha. So we follow the Buddha's compassionate path. And compassion is the function of Buddha's genuine Dharma. So there's a zinger line in there, isn't there? I kind of underlined it. And how can this make sense? How can our practice be neither for ourselves or others and be true compassion? In some inherent way, like he's saying. This is obviously not the kind of compassion of, oh, let me help you up. I see you're down. Let me help you up. Somehow it's a compassion that's more like, I'm just here. I'm completely here. You're completely right where you are. At the moment I'm standing and you're on the ground, I am here. And this is also somehow compassion. So it's a little bit confusing. And at the very end of the chapter, actually, he tries to kind of tie all this up somehow with this line. Practice the Buddha Dharma only for the sake of the Buddha Dharma. This is the way. Kind of underlines this point. Only practice to practice. So does this mean if somebody's falling apart amongst us in sesshin, we shouldn't check in with them? I mean, I know I'm not supposed to break silence, but maybe at least the teacher or the somebody should check on them. We can all see they're miserable. And here it gets interesting, because I think the answer is maybe. Or maybe yes and no. Or it depends. So there's a root teaching of Mahayana Buddhism that matters here. One that the Heart Sutra points to with all this form and emptiness talk. It's sometimes called the two truths, the teaching of the two truths. And we don't often talk about this in this way in our centers, maybe because it makes something really complex or subtle or beyond words sound kind of simple. Or maybe just talking about it kind of mucks with it in a certain way that we don't want to do. These two truths idea. And maybe more experienced teachers are always talking about it in everything they talk about and the way they live without talking about it so directly. But I thought it'd be helpful, so I'm going to talk about it. So here's the idea. There are two truths, or two worlds, or two realms. The relative and the absolute. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this a lot. He calls these two truths the historical dimension and the ultimate dimension. Relative and ultimate, historical and absolute. Conditioned and unconditioned. And this goes back to early Buddhism, but got like a supercharge with the Mahayana. To the point that the early Buddhists kind of thought this was a little nuts, You guys are a little bit off your rocker. And that continues to this day. So this relative world is how we tend to experience our everyday lives. Conditioned, complicated, busy. There's maybe some order to it. This seems to lead to that, at least most of the time. And ways of thinking about its complexity that kind of make room for it not to be too simple, but it really is kind of in this realm of this and that and that and this and you and me and bigger and smaller, and if I get that, I might not have that, and what's going to happen if I do this, and how do I decide? And dang, I screwed up. What a bad day. I got a promotion today. Well, it's a great day. I'm good. And the central figure here, of course, is me. And the relative world swirls around this me. Sometimes a little calmer, but always in motion. And often is not quite a storm. Even if we're good at acting calm as the storms rage. So this is the relative world. Which, most people you talk to, you would say, what are you talking about, Tim? That's the world, end of story. And we've been sitting here a while, it's pleasing to talk now. But there's this other idea, or pointer, or finger. The moon's out there somewhere. The absolute. We might also talk about emptiness, or peace, or deeply at rest. The sense of everything is already complete and never needed to be completed in the first place. Weird sounding terms like the unborn nature of all things, Unborn? The place where our wonderful and also troublesome idea of awakening might blossom, emerge, and be already always present. We could talk about it like complete trust, deep settledness, total engagement. Yes. And it's a yes that includes no. Absolute acceptance in the flow of everything. And not denying the relative, but not caught by it, Sometimes people say in the world, but not of the world. Although I've never liked that phrase too much. And it's a great blessing, actually, when we can touch this, feel this, a glimmer of it, a sense of it, an impulse, an intuition, something just out of your peripheral vision, a dream, an exhale, a peace that's not dependent on anything, not dependent on doing it right, not dependent on being the right kind of person. Unconditioned. Love is maybe the best word of all. Or naturalness. You see what I'm trying to get at? And the minute you make a concept of it, it's trouble. So back to our person in the retreat who's becoming a puddle. Or better yet, if they make it somehow to the Doksan room, which is probably our best spot for trying to determine what's actually helpful. And it's not like these two worlds are really separate, but to emphasize one more or the other. What's skillful? What's kind? What's loving here? And maybe it is absolutely to be fully in the relative world together, There's nothing wrong with this. That's a big mistake, and especially showed up in early Western Zen, this overemphasis on emptiness, which was really hurtful often, We had phrases like, just sit with it, And that'd be the default, Or maybe you say it nicely. Well, just sit with it till you see through. Ding, 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 ding. But maybe that's not helpful. Maybe what's actually helpful is encouragement, is kindness, is helping people see their own strengths. I kind of love asking somebody who's in distress, well, how did you manage to still be here? How'd you pull that off? Why aren't you halfway home by now? Sometimes that's a helpful reframing. The person realizes, oh, I'm pretty strong, actually. I'm upset, but I'm okay. Or maybe some kind of reframing or fresh look or another perspective or, that kind of thing, And nothing wrong with a hug, for goodness sakes, You ask permission, of course, very carefully. And maybe the answer to that great distress is just to encourage them to take care of themselves, take a zazen period off, rest, take it easy, It's actually okay. There's nothing you have to prove or get here, right? That's axiomatically true, right? That's in the teachings. There's nothing to attain. So that's really helpful, really kind, right? And that's familiar to us, very familiar. And I think when we see somebody upset, that's what we expect should happen, right? That's our default. But there's also a deep helping that's more rooted in this idea of the absolute. That maybe actually it might be, and it depends, that just staying in your body, walking right by that sobbing person is the most helpful thing. You hear them, your heart breaks, you're not cold Zen zombie. Maybe a tear rolls out of your eye, but you practice your lowered gaze, your breath awareness, and you walk to the dining hall because that is the next thing to do in the schedule. You come back to the Zendo and you sit in faith that this person has everything they need. And you are supporting them deeply by sharing that trust and faith and compassion and settledness in the Dharma way. It's not modeling exactly either. You're not like, well, look at me, do it like this. No. It's your practice. Not for you, not for others. That's compassion. Just the practice. Because, and of course this can go off the rails, right? But so can the compassionate relative way, right? Maybe somebody didn't need to be, actually, on a deep level, didn't need that kind of help just then. What they needed was space. What they needed was room. What they needed was to be left be so they would have the opportunity to touch something much deeper than reassurance or a hug. To touch this ultimate dimension where the misery is just a phantom vision, coming and going like mist. Real in its way, but not real in that way. An experience, not an indicator or a predictor or the last judgment on who you are, but only an experience that emerged from the conditioned mind according to conditions right here, right now. And like everything is completely impermanent and empty. So in the Heart Sutra, they say, this is the best gift you can give. Because this is the gift of fearlessness. And you can't tell somebody to be fearless. That is useless and probably harmful. But the practice can provide the opportunity to touch the mind ground and feel how deeply healed you already are and always have been and always will be no matter what happens. So we wouldn't want to get in the way of that. That would be really defaming the Dharma. So it's not so easy to decide, right? Maybe an experienced teacher gets lucky most of the time, Maybe. Encourages a little more one, a little more the other. And of course they're always kind of mixed together, in actual fact. Oh, that's tough, Can you imagine sitting with it? Does that seem within the realm? Okay, well let's try that. No? Okay. Please take the rest of the day off. Usually it's all together. Purism is an enemy of the Dharma too. Like, remember how in Sing Sing Min there was the one line, really caught in my mind, there's one line in there when Norman read the whole thing. The wise do nothing at all. Right? The wise do nothing at all. It said that. Did you hear that? But that's a two-part expression. So the two parts really matter. The first is, it's the wise that do nothing at all. So there's wisdom needed here. Not do nothing at all, period. Sorrow is empty, just ignore it, they'll figure it out. That's not compassion. But sometimes leaving them be is the sweetest, kindest, biggest, lovingest thing you can do. And other times, it isn't. So sesshin is our space to explore all this. Let me kind of wrap this up here. And this is why we go on and on about silence practice. And yes, we do know when we make these announcements talking about thanking you for being silent, it is a little ironic. Yes, we know that. Much less an hour-long talk about this, you know. But we can't help it. We're conditioned beings trying to teach the Dharma. The silence, the staying in your body, the staying in the schedule, the staying in the practice, this is all to create the right conditions where we have a little more of a glimmer of a chance of touching this bigger dimension of our lives. A feeling, and it's a feeling. I can't really describe it. It's different probably for me than for you. And even describing my own feeling to myself would be wrong anyway, you know. It's not describable, but there's a feeling. Some moment of clarity. Some moment of peace. Some surprising lack of reactivity. Some gradual dawning growth in our trust. And you don't need even an object connected to trust. It doesn't have to be trust in something, you know, just trust. Maybe you call it trust in Buddha Dharma if you really need another word there. Buddha doesn't mind. So thank you. Let me repeat the error of our ways here. Thank you for helping to co-create this possibility. It's our good hearts and our effort and our crazy minds, all of it, and our diligence and so on. So, thanks.